The city library was famous for its rare and strange books, and one of them particularly caught people's attention: an ancient tome with a mysterious inscription on the cover. No one knew what the text meant, but one thing was certain. Each page of the book reflected events from the life of the reader. One rainy evening, a woman, an avid book lover, decided to spend some time in the library. She stumbled upon this mysterious tome and, driven by curiosity, opened it. On the first page, she saw her reflection, but it was not just a reflection like in an ordinary mirror. It seemed darker, more sinister, and somehow menacing. The longer she looked at the page, the more she noticed strange details. A shadow appeared behind her reflection, moving independently of her. At first, she thought it was just a play of light, but the shadow became more and more distinct every time she returned to the book. With each passing day, the woman spent more and more time reading this book. The shadow became increasingly real, mirroring her movements with a delay, but sometimes doing its own thing. For example, when she reached out to grab a cup of tea, the shadow seemed to already be holding it. This started to frighten her, but it also fascinated her. Several weeks passed, and the shadow began to extend beyond the book. It started appearing in mirrors and other reflective surfaces in the house, in windows, TV screens, even in a cup of water. The woman noticed that the shadow began to live its own life, doing things she herself did not do. For instance, one morning she found all the windows in the house open, though she had closed them before bed. She tried to talk to the shadow, but it only observed her from behind the glass, mimicking her movements with eerie precision. The woman started to lose her mind. She could no longer distinguish where reality ended and illusion began. Every sound, every movement of the shadow drove her insane. One night, awakened by a loud knock, she approached the mirror and saw the shadow looking at her with a sinister smile. The shadow began to emerge from the mirror, taking a form similar to hers but much more terrifying. The woman tried to destroy the book, but the shadow was already too strong and wouldn't let her do it. In despair, she sought help from the SCP scientists. The researchers quickly identified the object as SCP-093, the mirror shadow. It was an anomalous object capable of reflecting distorted images of people and capturing their consciousness. Attempts to destroy SCP-093 were unsuccessful, and the shadow continued to hunt new victims, using its abilities for manipulation and chaos. The woman disappeared, leaving behind only the empty pages of the book and eerie reflections in the mirrors. Rumors began to circulate in the city about a house where mirrors show more than they should. SCP-093 was placed in a special container, but even there, the shadows continued to move, trying to find a way out. The story of the woman who fell into the trap of her own shadow became a legend among SCP staff. Everyone who encountered SCP-093 understood that it was not just an object, but something more. A living, malevolent entity, capable of controlling the minds and lives of people. The shadows continued to hunt, and no one knew when and where they would appear again. Deep in a dense forest, where no human had ever set foot, dwelled something strange and frightening. Locals had long spoken of a creature living in the forest, capable of altering the reality around it. No one knew its nature, but everyone avoided that place. One day, a group of researchers decided to uncover the mystery of this forest and set out to explore. They were experienced professionals, prepared for the most unusual situations. However, what they encountered in that forest surpassed all their expectations. At first glance, the forest seemed ordinary. The trees stood closely together, allowing only narrow strips of sunlight to pass through. But the further they went, the stranger the surrounding world became. The birds stopped singing, the air grew heavy, and the shadows began to move on their own. Suddenly, the researchers stumbled upon an abandoned village where time seemed to have stood still. The houses were in perfect condition, but an ominous silence hung in the air. Inside the houses, they found traces of life, as if the inhabitants had left in a hurry, leaving everything as it was. The researchers noticed that as they moved deeper into the forest, the reality around them began to change. The trees became strange, their shapes and colors distorted. The sounds disappeared, leaving only silence. They felt their minds starting to warp. In the center of the forest, they discovered a stone circle within which lay a creature known as SCP-3008, the Twilight Forest. It was an anomalous place capable of altering space and time around it, turning the forest into a trap for anyone who dared to enter. Every step deeper into the stone circle was like traveling to another world. The trees here were covered in strange markings, and each step echoed in their minds. The researchers began to see their companions in different forms, hearing voices that weren't there. They tried to stay together, but the forest seemed to subdue their consciousness. The creature began speaking to them, offering a choice: stay in the forest forever, or become part of its essence. The researchers tried to resist, but their efforts were futile. One by one, they disappeared, becoming part of the Twilight Forest. In the end, the last of them found a way out, but was no longer himself. He became the bearer of the forest's malevolent power, spreading its influence further. Outside the forest, SCP-3008 was placed under strict control, but its influence continued to spread. People who entered the forest disappeared without a trace, and each time, the creature grew stronger. SCP researchers tried to find a way to destroy the Twilight Forest, but all their attempts ended in failure. Over time, the forest began to grow, consuming new territories. No one knew when it would stop and what needed to be done to halt its growth. With each passing day, the sinister influence of SCP-3008 grew stronger, and people began to believe that the creature was unstoppable. At an auction in an old mansion, an unusual painting was presented. It depicted a beautiful garden with an ancient castle in the background. The painting looked so realistic that it seemed one could step into this world and stroll through its alleys. It seemed that the artist had put his soul into it, but something was off. The painting caught the eye of a collector who decided to acquire it at any cost. He offered a huge sum of money and finally became the owner of this artwork. However, as soon as he hung the painting in his home, he began to notice strange changes. At first, these were minor details, the changing positions of clouds or shadows. But soon the changes became more sinister. Figures of people began to appear in the garden, seemingly watching him. They stood in the shadows of the trees, hiding from direct light, but their presence was palpable. Soon, the collector began to see these people outside the painting as well. They followed him everywhere, disappearing as soon as he paid attention to them. He felt their gazes on him, heard whispers coming from the painting. His mind began to lose its grip on reality. In desperation, he turned to SCP scientists, who quickly identified the painting as SCP-682, the cursed painting. This painting was capable of capturing the souls of its viewers and transporting them to its world, where they became part of its depiction. Every time someone looked at the painting, it absorbed part of their essence, creating new figures on its canvas. The researchers began to study the painting, trying to understand its nature. They discovered that the painting did not just reflect reality but created its own. People trapped in its snare remained there forever, becoming part of the sinister composition. The owner of the painting realized he was the next victim. He tried to destroy the painting, but it proved invulnerable. Instead, the painting began to absorb him completely, turning him into one of its grim figures. He felt his consciousness dissolve as he became part of that sinister world. In the end, the painting disappeared from the auction, leaving behind only an empty frame. People who had seen the painting remembered it as something eerie and cursed. Now it wandered the world, absorbing the souls of new victims and replenishing its grim garden. SCP researchers continued their search, trying to find traces of SCP-682. They discovered that the painting had the ability to move on its own, choosing new owners and drawing them into its world. It grew stronger, and each new owner became another victim. Over time, the painting began to affect people even if they saw it in photographs or videos. It spread its sinister influence through screens and photos, consuming more and more victims. No one knew how to stop this process, and each new day brought more fear and horror. The painting became a legend, and people began to fear even mentioning it. SCP continued its research, but each new step led to new victims. The painting continued its sinister journey, and no one knew where it would stop and who would become its next victim.